help me welcome Colonel Gail Halvorsen to the stage.
All right, go.
Go down this way, guys. Hey, guys, this way. You can go down the stairs. Third row. Sit in the third row. All right. Go ahead.
Can you sit nested over here? All right. I thought it was a good idea. Who knew? Colonel Halvorsen, it's a pleasure to have you here. We're so grateful to have you on this stage today.
Well, I'm especially glad to be here. If it wasn't for kids just like that, catching them instead of throwing it, I wouldn't be here. But I'm grateful. At 95 years old, I'm grateful to be anywhere, as a matter of fact. But I'm especially grateful to be here. You know, I got great memories of this place. In 1957, I was a student, and I got more than an education. Something happened to the hospital. I got a future C-130 pilot. Air Force guy, and so I was happy to pick that. Now, not all of you can claim that. I tell you, get a young son born here the same time you're here. But I'm really pleased to be back in the epitome of the Air Force spirit and the futures of leaders of the Air Force, men and women. Man, we're going to be in good shape.
Well, we're grateful to have you. I noticed you're wearing two different sets of wings. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was invited. The British invited a few Americans to train with the RAF during the war. A couple of reasons. One of them, get them out of traffic, pat them, train them in the States, and to teach them how to speak English. So we had a great time. I got a chance to train with them and had a wonderful experience. Trouble was, when I put their names back in personnel, they signed me as a cargo pilot, for Pete's sake. And again, I wouldn't be here if they hadn't done that, I guess.
That's wonderful. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, though. As you saw in the video, you come from very humble beginnings. What in the world made you want to leave those sugar beet fields of Utah?
Well, I was raised on a small farm in northern Utah. We couldn't afford a tractor, so I was the only tractor my dad had. And the sugar beet was a motivator. That was a beast of a crop to grow. You had to thin them out 12 inches apart in the spring and on your hands and knees, and it was a mess. In the dust, I'd look up in the sky, and there goes an airplane from Utah to Idaho, and boy, just having a blast. Wow, and go back to the work. Well, there was a competition at that time. They weren't getting enough pilots in the Air Force, just before the war at Pearl Harbor. And they had put out a program for a non-college pilot training program. I didn't have much money to go to school. I could get blue correspondence. And it was all the towns in northern Utah run a ground school for a couple of months for the pilot training, for the pilot exam program were written. And there was 140 of us. And then they gave 10 scholarships. I memorized everything. I got one. So I started flying. I had 10 of us that got the scholarships out of Brigham City. Our instructor was the first time he had any students too, so we all learned together. But the one thing that was interesting about that, when we got through that training, we put in $50 each and bought an airplane. Try that. Well, it was a Piper Cub, but it had a 55 horsepower Franklin engine, single ignition. So every time you took off, you looked for a landing place. That one mag quit, boy, you're a glider. So that's a good way to learn. The instructor says, all of a sudden, in different maneuvers, you say, the engine just quit. And boy, you better have a place to land. You didn't pass.
So you have your wings, you train with the RAF, and let's fast forward now to your experience in Mobile, Alabama. What made you want to join the Berlin Airlift?
Well, the thing that wanted to go into Berlin Airlift, during the war I was a transport guy, and went to Mobile, Alabama, the transition point, and I wanted to be a guy when they Stalin cut off the food to millions of people, and mostly women and children. And I was in one squadron, and the squadron was tasked to go was a different squadron. But my buddy, married buddy, he just had a 6-month-old baby, and I was single, and Sundays they'd have me over for dinner. And Pete Soa was on the list to go on the Berlin Airlift. And I'd seen how they loved that baby. And I wanted to go. My girlfriend wasn't writing too good letters right then. I said, boy, Pete, if I can work it, you stay here and I'll go in your place. He said, boy, I hope you can do that. But Colonel Hahn, the commander of both squadrons, says, sure, we'll just switch them. So it's kind of a fluke that I got to go.
Tell me about how you and your friends felt about going to deliver food and supplies to the same people who just a few years earlier were dedicated to changing the world forever.
Boy, that's a key area in how we respond to different stimuli. It's been said by somebody that we can control 95% of how we respond to our environment without getting ulcers, if we take that initiative initially. And the other 5%, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change and the courage to change the things I can't. So I was bitter about the Germans. When I got that pilot license and got that airplane, my best buddy I went to high school with says, Hal, I want to try that. Things don't look good in the world. I'd like to try flying. I always wanted to. So I was an expert. I had 35 hours. I said, I'll show you how to do it. So I took him on a flight. I had to take up in the high mountains in a hot day. It was hard to get any altitude of 55 horsepower engine. So right next to the mountain, we'd have updrafts. And we, like a glider, we'd ride the updrafts up the ridge at 10,000 feet. Mountains are 5, 9 or more. And go to the valley and do a turn and spin and come back and do it again. So he could do 2 turn spins pretty quick. He was coordinated. Well, as soon as Pearl Harbor came, Conrad went down and enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Trained as a fighter pilot, sent to England. The Germans shot down my buddy and killed him. That was a pretty hard load to bear. I felt like I'd really put him into that position. So I didn't feel very good about the Germans. I had a cross to bear. And then when the blockade came, I knew then when Pete had a decision to make, when I volunteered to take Pete's place. But then I knew that most all the people in Berlin were women and children, 2.5 million people. Most of the guys were gone, or dead, or still prisoners of war in Russia. So it didn't take long for me to say, between Pete and the women and kids were taking the brutal bunt of taking away the milk for the babies. That changed me.
It's amazing that you would have that experience and then still have the desire to go and be a part of taking care of people who were your bitter enemy just a few years earlier. So what was it when you were there that made you want to take the ground tour of Berlin? And if you could, walk us through what went through your mind that led you to giving 2 sticks of gum to those kids.
Well, furthest I got away from home most of the time. I was on a farm. We had lots of love and plenty of food, and that was all we knew needed. And I had a good horse all the time. I was raised on a horse, chasing cows. And furthest, when I was a little guy, the furthest I got away from home was when my brother went to town with the parents, and he had a horse, but he had a fancy horse. I had an old plug, and he wouldn't let me ride his horse. But when he went to town, I got on that horse, and he went through a barbed wire fence with me and cut my leg, and well, I got in all kind of trouble. But that's the kind of thing that hitchhiked me. The other question.
No, it was about what made you want to take that ground tour in Berlin.
Yeah. Okay. I just getting ready to tell you how far I'd been before I got to Berlin. So I was a farm kid going to Berlin, and we were right there. And the first flight in, all the buildings looked like they were just stark to the sky. No roofs on. It was rough. And we'd get there, land, do 3 round trips a day, go to bed, and do it all again right quick. And I wanted to get pictures in the streets of Berlin, the devastation. I always carried a movie camera with me. And so I did 3 round trips just before noon, came back to West Germany, and I had my camera, an airplane. My buddy had a load of flour going to Berlin, next hard stand. And I said, boy, instead of going to bed, I'm going to go to Berlin. Told my co-pilot, go to bed, I'll be here tonight, evening, but time to fly back to Berlin. And I jumped on his airplane, went to Berlin, had a buddy with a Jeep waiting for me, took me around, shot movies all over, ended up at the barbed wire fence around the field to keep people from getting run over with airplanes. Shoot movies, airplanes coming over my head. And barbed wire, and right up against it with this uniform, and all of a sudden about 30 kids, boys and girls mixed, came right up the barbed wire, right against the uniform. Just a few years before it was killing their brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and their parents. And they were friendly. Why were they friendly? They knew their aunts and uncles and cousins were on their side of the red line in East Berlin. And they came over to West Berlin. You don't want anything to do with those guys. They tell you what you're going to be, what you're going to do, what you're going to eat. Anything you can do to make this succeed. I don't think they can feed you all. But for Pete's sake, stick with them. The kids were the bottom line. Spread out that information. Stick with it. You can't imagine the difference in how you live in West Berlin and how we live with the Soviets. The kids, again, on that end, did it. That's where it came from.
One of the stories you told me when I was sitting on your couch in your home was how the children reacted when you handed them that stick of gum.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, I was there for an hour talking to them. And they were cheering me up. They said, look, it's just the beginning. It's beautiful weather. It's sun shining. You don't have any trouble. But when the winter comes, you guys are flying between the buildings in order to get down. The runway's too short. And we have trouble getting stopped with a 20,000-pound load in the back end. So the radar was set right between the buildings. We come right below the buildings on the final approach to get in there. And I wanted to shoot that movie of that approach. And those kids were right there. For an hour, they were just cheering me up. Says, hey, look, don't worry. When that fog comes in, don't worry about us. We don't have to have enough to eat. Just don't give up on us. Someday, we'll have our freedom. But if we lose it, we'll never get it back. Kids, 7 to 14, giving me a lecture in American about how freedom was. They were so convincing. I just stood there dumbfounded. Looked at my watch and said, I had a Jeep waiting for me to take me around town. I said, kids, I got to go. I got to leave right now. And thanks a lot. Appreciate it. We'll never give up on you. I got about 30 feet away, and a voice says, these kids are so different. How come they're so different? And in the flash, I knew. 1 hour at the fence in this uniform, and not one kid, by voice inflection or body language, said, dummy, don't you know kids like chocolate? And when I realized that, I couldn't believe it. They had none. For a couple of years, they had none except from GIs in the streets of Berlin. None available. And not one of the boys or girls, by any indication, or by hand motion. Do you have any chocolate? When I realized that, I'd flown to South America, I'd flown in Europe, and flown all over different places during the war doing different stuff. And kids in those countries, even the United Kingdom, they chase you down the street in American uniform. You've got a connection to the chocolate shop. We want some of that stuff. Grab you by the arm. Gum chum, chocolate. Not one of those kids. They're so grateful. Gratitude. How important is that in human relations? Gratitude. Makes enemies friends. It's a synergy. It opens up all kind of possibilities. Gratitude. That's what did it. Simply gratitude. Well, anyway, I reached my pocket and I said, hope I got something, a candy bar. And I had 2 sticks of Wrigley's Double Mint Gum. And 30 kids? I said, boy, some little girl's going to get a black eye. I don't want to try that. And so I turned to leave, and a voice clear as a bell. I know it's true. That's the only trigger that did it. I had a command, go back to the fence. A still small voice, go back to the fence. It was a command. I just turned around, went back to the fence. Boy, they grabbed the barbed wire, took the 2 pieces, broke them in half, passed them through the barbed wire. The kids were doing this translating, and here come the rush. And oh boy. And there was a big conversation going on. No pushing, no shoving. And it was obvious the kids that didn't get it even wanted a piece of the wrapper. The kids that have a stick of gum, tore off the outer wrapper in strips and passed it. And the kids that got a strip of paper put it up their nose and smelled it and smelled it. Their eyes got big. I couldn't believe it. Just came out of the United States of America. Not enough appreciation. And that demonstration says, hey, buddy, you better be glad you're an American. And I said, wow, for $10 I could put them on Easy Street. I could include chocolate. But boy, I'll be getting back at Rhine Mine tonight and get a shower and turn right around and fly 3 round trips to Berlin. I won't get through flying that till tomorrow. Good thing I got a good co-pilot. I'll be hanging on the ropes. And I had a great guy done. He could do a better job than I could. So that was good to have a good team. Well, then I remembered when I learned to fly, when I got the pilot license, I flew up to Idaho on a cross country, and where I used to live in Rigby, and I had my old buddy there, and I took a big bag of candy bars, tied them on parachutes. I knew I couldn't land up there where my old farm was up in Idaho, but I went from Utah, flipped the cross country up there, went over his house and gunned the engine a couple times. He came out. I dropped a big parachute candy bars to him and went back down to Utah. So I said, hey, kids, there's a big open place here between the buildings and the fence. And if you'll stand there when I come in tomorrow, one of the trips in the daylight, I'll drop enough chocolate bars for all of you to have some if you'll do what's the magic word, which your dad and mom tell you. You share it? Will you share it? Oh, jawohl, we'll share it. And jumping up and down. I said, okay, I'll be back tonight, but don't worry about tonight. I'll be here just before noon tomorrow on my second trip. And then I started running. We were late for the Jeep. They yelled at me, come back. Boy, it didn't sound like the same kid. Come back. What's the matter? He said, we got to know what airplane you're in. Every 5 minutes there's an airplane coming over our head, landing the runway. If we have to watch out in the airplane for some package of chocolate, we'll be cross-eyed. We won't be able to last through the day. We got to know what airplane you're in. That's a pretty logical question. And it's a good thing you ask questions sometimes, you know. And so I said, well, then I remembered. I said, look, initially I had to come over Tempelhof and then go over East Germany, Berlin rather, and come back and land. So when I come over your heads the first time, when I'm over your heads, I'm going to wiggle the wings, that big airplane. So when the big airplane wiggles the wings like crazy, that's got it. Just watch that. Get out of here. Let's start this thing. Went over the BX in West Berlin. Had no trouble getting on the airplane with this ticket I'm wearing. Every 5 minutes there's an empty airplane going back, so I had no problem getting on the airplane. Went to the basic change. Well, first of all, we lived in the attic of a barn. When we got there was no room anywhere. I was living actually in a barn in Zeppelinheim. Well, anyway, co-pilot and engineer, give me a ration. Chocolate was highly rationed in West Germany. What are you going to do with it? You are? You got permission? No. You're going to get us in trouble. I said, I'll take responsibility. I got to have your ration. And they were good guys. They bought all they could buy. It was just weeks, all you could get. Week's ration, 3 rations. Holy cow. Hit him in the head with that going 110 miles an hour will make the wrong impression. So I remembered back to the old Piper Cub we had. Handkerchiefs bad. Handkerchiefs. I had a bad cold, had lots of handkerchiefs. So we did a test top. In the barn, we went up in the attic of the barn and tied up handkerchief parachutes on big packages of blocks and threw them out to see how they'd open. Some of the buddies saw us. You can't go home really playing you're out of your mind, guy. And we said that we're out of our mind. We don't want anybody to know about it, of course. Well, we did a test program and went back that night. And of course, the next day we got over Berlin about 11 o'clock. And thank goodness it was a clear day. And as we came over, looked down in the open place, and there was those kids, 30 of them, right in the middle. I'm sure they hadn't told another soul. And wiggled the wings, and they just went crazy, just waved like mad. Came over their head, and the engineer standing right, we only get about 100, 200 feet in the air, and the engineer standing between the two pilots. And on the C-54, we had a flare chute, like a stovepipe comes out of the flight deck for flares. So if you lose an engine, 2 engines or more over the farm at night, you drop flares and miss the farmer's house. So it was really handy. The flare chute was right between the legs of my engineer. So he had it all ready. We had 3 parachutes loaded really heavy, to load mostly so they'd see the stuff. So we came over and he said, "Sure, shove it out, Elkins." We'd gone over the fence immediately. Didn't know what happened. We didn't know whether we hit him or not. And we were more worried about the guys lined up to take off and seeing this thing and reported us. But anyhow, we taxied out to take off. 20,000 pounds of stuff was off in about 15 minutes from the unloading the Germans, flour, medicine, whatever we had. Taxied out along the point to take off, and there through the barbed wire were 3 handkerchiefs on arms waving through there at all the airplanes. I wish they wouldn't do that. But I rolled out the window and waved to the guys anyway in this uniform and said, "Wow, pickup. That's all we're through." Well, for a week we flew, got kids were lined up, more kids, 2 weeks, kids more lined up, and 3 weeks, and there was a crowd around there. And I said, "Once more and that's all?" How many said that and then regretted it? Once more and that's all. So we got another one and dropped it. And boy, the reaction was getting big. The kids were really celebrating. They're out there all the time. And let's do once more and that. And we did once more and that's all. Too late. Came back to Berlin one day to Rhine-Main, met with an officer at the airplane. "Halvorsen, Colonel Hahn wants to see you right now." I said, "What for?" He says, "He'll tell you what for." For a little while, I thought it was going to be court-martial. And he said, "Halvorsen, did you everything learn I took ROTC. Did you everything learn in ROTC about military?" Yes, sir, I'm sorry. "No excuse, sir, no excuse." And he said, "Well, General Tunner called me and said, 'What are you doing dropping parachutes, Hahn?'" "Not dropping parachutes, sir, you know that. We're landing, unloading all this stuff." He said, "Better find out what's going on in your outfit clunk. A lesson for you going forward, make your boss look good. Don't try and go around your boss no matter how smart you are. Go through channels." That's important to do that. Well, that's how it started. General Tunner says, "Just keep me informed. Go ahead." All my buddies started doing it. A 2.6 of gum turned into 20 tons through the air, through the sky over the next 9 months. And that's documented. And 3 tons, we saved 3 tons at Christmas time. And the orphanages, I went around to a lot of the orphanages there and took stuff to the orphanage kids. And we took 3 tons to the orphanages.
And that turned into a big campaign back home too, didn't it?
Oh, the campaign. The Hershey Candy Bar Company sent me a message, "Halvorsen, how much of this stuff do you want?" And I gave them some ridiculous number, and they kept sending it all the time. Like we couldn't tie up the parachutes, for heaven's sakes. So Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts, the school in Chicopee says, hey, we'll tie all your parachutes up, just give them to us. So we did. They just shipped the stuff. They just load the candy on extra. It doesn't even on the manifest. They just throw it on the airplane. And then they take it over to the kids in Chicopee, Mass. That's after they tied it up. But the Chicopee, Mass. kids tied it all up, ready to drop. We just cut the top off. And then we quit dropping it around the field, of course. We'd drop it all over the city. The crew chief would go back and check it out at the escape hatch. We got 4 big escape hatches. Cut the top out of the box, handholds, keep the box, hopefully, and check it up against the window and just scatter it all over the place. Crazy pattern.
Tell me a little bit about Peter Zimmerman and his question for you.
Oh, we got lots of letters, naturally. Well, Peter Zimmerman wrote me a letter. He said, look, he said, I'm 9 years old, and my legs aren't very long, and I'm not getting this stuff. Bigger kids are beating me to it. And he says, but I tell you what you can do. He says, when you take off, come down the Spray River Second Railroad Bridge, turn right 1 block, and live at the bombed-out house in the corner. I'll be there every day at 2 o'clock. Drop it there. Well, I still got that letter. And so we took off. It was clear. We got permission. Tower, we got to deviate from the flight pattern, leaving town. And he said, go ahead. We'll clear you where you want to do. So we went down the Spray Second Bridge, turned right. There was a house out there, and a kid looked and said, check it out the window. My crew chief checked it out.